They say there are stories in every streetlight, every whisper in the library, every quiet diner booth where someone stirs their coffee just a little too long. I used to believe that, until I tried to write one. My name is Calamaric, and before anyone ever bought a single word I wrote, I had to survive 100 rejections, 3-day jobs, and the kind of family that didn't believe dreams were meant for people like me. I remember the exact moment I decided to become a writer. It wasn't romantic. There was no inspiring sunset, no grand epiphany. I was 16, sitting on the hardwood floor of our cramped flat in South Manchester. My sister Simone was braiding her hair and talking about law school. Mom was cooking with her back to us, radio humming some old Elton John tune. And Dad, when he wasn't nursing one of his silent moods, was frowning at the mortgage bill. I was reading, like I always was, a library copy of a Margaret Atwood novel with a coffee stain on the cover and the spine nearly cracked in half. I don't even remember the title now, just the way her words curled around my ribs. How I stopped breathing until the chapter ended. I closed the book and said aloud, "I'm going to write a novel one day." Simone snorted. Mom didn't turn around. Dad said, "You'll never sell a book, Kala." And just like that, the room went back to normal. Simone kept braiding. The pot boiled. The silence sank. That line stuck. It chased me through school, into university, through every tiny flat I rented, and every shift I pulled at the cafe down the hill. It sat behind my eyes every time I tried to write, whispering that I was just playing pretend, that real authors didn't come from girls like me, that I should get a real job, maybe something clerical, something safe, something where rejection didn't feel like a punch to the lungs. But here's the thing about being told you can't. It does something. For some people it builds a wall, for others it builds a fire. Mine started small. A flicker of heat beneath my sternum every time I opened my laptop after a double shift. Every time I dragged myself out of bed to squeeze in 2 pages before the world woke up. I wrote, quietly, secretly, a chapter here, a scene there. Most of it was rubbish. I was trying to mimic every author I admired instead of finding my own voice. I knew it. I kept going anyway, because quitting felt like handing that little voice, the one that sounded suspiciously like Dad, a trophy. I didn't tell anyone about the manuscript until I had a full draft. 89,000 words. I printed it out on the library printer over the course of 3 days, hiding the pages under my coat so the other regulars wouldn't see. I hole-punched it, stuck it in a binder, and left it on my windowsill for 3 days. I couldn't bear to read it, couldn't bear to think of someone else reading it. The first person I showed it to was Haley, my flatmate. She was studying to become a nurse and had the kind of blunt honesty I usually avoided. But I trusted her. She read the first 20 pages and looked up at me with raised brows. "You actually wrote this?" "Yeah." "Bloody hell, Calla, it's good." That was the first time I thought maybe Dad was wrong. I submitted it to agents. 43 rejections. Some were kind, some were templated. One agent told me I needed a better hook, and that working-class heroines don't sell well internationally. That one stung. I didn't write for 2 weeks after that. Then came email number 44, from a woman named Marta Green, who said, "Your voice is raw and magnetic. I want to help you shape this into something unforgettable." I screamed. I actually screamed, woke Haley up from a nap and danced around the living room until we nearly broke the coffee table. The work wasn't over. Marta was ruthless with her edits. We rewrote the entire third act. I cut 2 characters I loved. I changed the ending. There were days I hated her, days I hated myself more. But I kept going. I worked the cafe mornings and edited nights. The title became Tire Bricks and Daisies. It was about a girl who grows up between boarded-up council houses and writes poetry on crumbling walls. Fiction, mostly. But not really. We pitched the manuscript to publishers in the spring. More rejections. Not as many. But each one still landed like a body blow. Then, one Friday evening, I was finishing a shift where a man had yelled at me for getting his oat milk order wrong, and my phone pinged. "Marta, call me right now." I stepped into the alley behind the shop, heart in my throat. "Calla," she said, "you just got a 2-book deal." I slid down the wall. legs gone, world spinning. It wasn't a massive advance. It wasn't international headlines. But it was real. A real publisher. A real book. With my name on it. I called Mom. She said, "That's nice, love. But will it pay the rent?" I didn't call Dad. I didn't need to. The first time I saw such Bricks and Daisies on a bookstore shelf, I nearly cried. I didn't buy it. I just stood there and stared. A middle-aged woman walked past me and picked up a copy. I watched her flip through it. Buy it. I wanted to chase her down the street and thank her. I didn't. I started getting messages. From readers. From girls like me. From women who had never seen themselves in stories before. I responded to every single one. My second book came out a year later. Time the Gutter Garden. It was darker, braver, more me. It hit the Sunday Times list. And that's when Simone called. She had just finished her master's in corporate law. She said, "I saw your name in the paper. Dad did too." I waited. "He wants to talk." I said no. Not then. Not yet. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about pride. It was about the story I was still writing. The one that didn't end with me seeking their approval. The one where I built something they never thought I could. My third book sold out its first print run in 3 days. I bought my own flat. Small, sunlit, quiet. And that's when he showed up. At my doorstep. With a copy of Bricks and Daisies in his hands. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Hands. I stared down at the worn paperback in his hand, leather cover creased at the spine, pages slightly yellowed. It felt surreal to see my own words reflected back at me in Dad's dull hallway light. He stood there, stoic, the copy of Bricks and Daisies trembling in his fingertips. I didn't expect you to actually write a book," he said, voice low. His eyes didn't meet mine at first, glancing instead at the scuffed floorboards. My heart thundered so loud I thought he'd hear it through the door. "Neither did I whispered. That single hinge creaked as he shifted his weight. The door between us seemed to thin, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I remembered the long nights at the cafe, the sting of rejection emails, Marta's red pen edits that often left me bleeding on the page. Everything. Distilled into these words. Dad raised the book, opened to a random page and pointed at a line. "She wrote in the margins," he said, reading. "To see myself in someone else's story, this is what saved me." He shut the book with a slow, deliberate motion. "You wrote that?" His voice cracked. Tears welled in my eyes. Tears I'd refused to let fall in front of anyone. I nodded. "Yes." He looked down at the copy like it was a fragile bird, one he wasn't sure he wanted to set free. For years, I'd chased validation from strangers, from publishers, from readers around the globe. Yet here it was, the only approval I truly craved, perched on his lip. "I didn't understand," he murmured. "When you said you wanted to write, I thought it was just childish." His confession hung in the air heavier than any praise. It wasn't childish. It was what I needed to do. My voice steadied as I took a step forward, closing the gap between us. He blinked, swallowing. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. "I really am." It hit me like a wave. Years of resentment, anger, doubt, they all washed away in that moment. I reached out and touched his arm. It was the first time he let me touch him in years without tense hesitation. "Thank you," I whispered. He gave me a small, lopsided smile that looked almost like himself. "Thank you for giving my daughter something to be proud of." Pride. I tasted it on my tongue, warm and strange. I walked into the living room where Mum and Simone sat, side by side, on the faded floral couch. Both looked startled when they saw me. Simone held a glass of water in one hand, while Mum clutched her knitting needles. "He's here?" Simone's eyes darted between me and the closed door behind me. "He came to see me," I said, smoothing down the front of my cardigan. Mum set her knitting aside. "Is it about the book?" I nodded. "He's proud." Simone's mouth fell open. I'd never seen her speechless, ever. "You're serious?" she asked, voice soft as a whisper. "Dead serious." Mum moved to pour tea into 3 mismatched mugs. The kettle hissed, steam curling upward. I took a seat, gripping the edges of my chair as if it might slip away. Simone placed her mug in front of me. "I have to know. How did you do it? How did you survive all those no's?" I took a slow breath. I wrote because I had to. Because every no made me want to prove them wrong. Some days, it was all I had left. Simone stirred her tea, stirring in her own regret. "I'm sorry I doubted you." My mother reached over and patted my hand. "We never knew how much it meant to you, love. We just didn't understand it." "But you understand now," I said, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. Simone nodded. "I still can't believe it." Quote, "A million questions swirled between us, about advances, about editors, about bestseller lists. But I felt lighter, unburdened. Because for the first time, my family saw me. Not the little girl on the Rats in the Margins list. Not the cafe barista with dreamy eyes. Me, the writer." That summer, I held book events in local bookstores. Lines formed around corners. I read passages aloud, my voice trembling with excitement. I watched young girls lean forward, as though trying to catch every word. And I remembered the girl on the hardwood floor, clutching that coffee-stained copy of Atwood's novel. One evening, after a reading at a small UK town, Dad approached me backstage. The room smelled of old carpet and recycled air. He handed me another copy, his own personal edition, signed by him with shaky handwriting. "To Calla, with pride." I slipped it into my bag, heart swelling. Months passed. Agents called, overseas publishers offered translation deals, and speaking engagements filled my calendar. I savored the whirlwind but guarded my quiet mornings. Those early dawns remained sacred. The click of keys, the hush before the city woke. I began the first draft of my 3rd novel. This time, the heroine was a cartographer mapping forgotten worlds, because I'd finally realized that my own journey was unmappable until I wrote it. Yet, even as the accolades grew, an unease settled in my chest. Success felt like standing on a precipice, exhilarating and terrifying. One crisp autumn morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No return address. Inside, a single postcard featuring our old Manchester flat. On the back, a scrawled note. "Words have power. Don't lose yours." My breath caught. My heart pounded. I stared at the photo of peeling wallpaper and crooked window blinds. My first writing sanctuary. Why now? Who sent it? I reread the message. It wasn't congratulatory. It was a warning. That afternoon, I drove back to Manchester. The street looked narrower than I remembered. The flat stood there, shabby, silent, memory-laden. I stepped off the pavement, my boots crunching gravel. The door was unlocked. Inside, the walls echoed with ghosts of my past. I walked the rooms, hands trailing over dusty picture frames. The piano in the corner, where I'd first scribbled poems on half-melted, candle-drenched sheets, sat silent. And there, on the kitchen windowsill, I found a new note, this one typed, "Beware the applause. It can be louder than the truth." A chill crawled up my spine. Applause. Truth. What was I missing? What danger lurked behind every compliment? I turned toward the hallway, heart hammering. And in that moment, I heard a noise, a soft click, like a lock turning. I wasn't alone. My head whipped back toward the doorway. And then, everything went black. The darkness wasn't complete. It was like a deep velvet, soft but suffocating. I couldn't tell if I was unconscious or dreaming, until a prickling sensation jolted through my fingers. Pain bloomed at the base of my skull. My throat felt dry, throat tight, tongue thick. Then the cold hit me. Concrete under my knees, metal pressing into my spine. I forced my eyes open and saw a ceiling, low, exposed beams, a dangling bulb. I was in a basement. Panic tried to rise, but I crushed it down. Think, Culla. Think. Where was my bag? My phone? I struggled to sit up. Joints stiff, balance precarious. I blinked at the dim glow of the single flickering bulb overhead. The air smelled damp, metallic, no windows, one rusted door. Footsteps. I stiffened, heavy soles on wood, getting closer. I braced myself. If someone walked through that door. It creaked open. A man stepped inside. Average height, faded jeans, gray windbreaker, hood up. My stomach dropped. But it wasn't a stranger. It was Lewis. Lewis Branson, my ex-editor, the one who got fired 2 years ago after manipulating multiple authors. I hadn't seen his face since I testified against him in the publishing house's internal inquiry. Marta said he'd disappeared. No one heard from him again. Until now. "Calla," he said, voice smooth like old whiskey left too long in a glass. "Still writing?" My throat went dry. "What do you want?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked slowly toward me, crouched at a safe distance. "You're more famous than I thought you'd ever be. Bestseller, interviews, TED Talk. Impressive." I didn't flinch. I'd spent too many years shrinking. "You dragged my name through the mud," he said. "You abused your position," I snapped. He smiled, a cold, brittle thing. "You always had claws." "Let me go." He tilted his head. "You should thank me. You wouldn't have gotten that deal without my notes." I stared at him, heart slamming against my ribs. "You think you made me?" Lewis leaned in. "I think the literary world needs a reminder. Success is fragile." Then he dropped a file on the floor beside me. I stared at it. "What is that?" Quote, "Your next manuscript," he said casually, standing. "Or at least, what people think is your next. I ghostwrote it in your style. Complete with fake drafts, metadata, even email timestamps. If you don't retract your statements about me, it goes live in 2 weeks. Under your name." My blood ran cold. "You're bluffing." He smiled again. "I guess we'll find out." Then he turned and left. The door slammed, locked. I sat there, breathing hard. Everything I'd worked for, my reputation, my story, my truth, was being held hostage by a man who once told me to smile more on book jackets. But I wasn't that quiet girl on the cafe floor anymore. I waited until I heard the outer door close again, counted to 50. Then I pulled at the duct tape binding my wrists. It scraped my skin raw, but it gave a little. My boot heel scraped against the floor. I twisted, pulled. And after what felt like hours, I was free. I grabbed the file, flicked through it. He wasn't lying. The draft looked eerily like mine. The details were precise. It was my worst fear turned into a 350-page lie. But he'd made one mistake. He didn't know I always backed up my real drafts. Password protected. Time-stamped. My laptop had an encrypted log. If I could get out of here. I stood and approached the door. No window, heavy bolt. I scanned the room. Metal shelving. A toolbox. I grabbed a wrench. Took a deep breath. And started hammering. 2 days later, I was back in London. Marta's office. My voice hoarse. My hands bruised. "I don't believe it," she said, jaw clenched. "I can prove it," I said. "I want to publish the real manuscript. Now, asterisk." She looked at me. "Calla, if we release this, it'll go public. The media will eat it up." "Good," I said. "Let them." She hesitated. "It could backfire." I stared her down. "Not telling the truth is how he wins." Marta finally nodded. "Then, we do it your way." Ants. The press conference was standing room only. I wore black, spoke clearly, held up the forged manuscript and my real draft. I explained the timeline, the threats, the file metadata, everything. And then I said, "Some people will try to steal your voice, twist it, sell it, but stories don't belong to gatekeepers. They belong to the brave." That line went viral. Readers rallied, authors came forward. Even journalists started digging into Lewis's past. My publisher backed me. Every store that stocked the forged book pulled it within 48 hours. I'd taken back my voice. But the damage was done. I couldn't sleep without checking the locks twice. Every shadow felt like a threat. I started keeping a security system. Changed my number. And yet, I kept writing. Because when someone tries to silence you, the loudest revenge is to keep telling the truth. The Gutter Garden went back to number 1. And I started my 4th book. A novel about a woman whose words were stolen. Who fought to get them back. A woman who refused to disappear. I called it Snock, the author who never vanished. And in the dedication, I wrote, "To anyone who's ever been told they'd never sell a book, this one's for you." But just when I thought the storm had passed, a new envelope arrived. This time, no postcard. Just a single line typed in bold. "You may have won this chapter, but I'm rewriting the ending." The ink was smeared. There was no return address. But I knew it wasn't over. My hands trembled as I folded the letter for the 5th time. "You may have won this chapter, but I'm rewriting the ending." That single sentence had wormed its way into my mind, repeating itself like a cursed refrain. I kept trying to shake it, trying to dismiss it as the desperate act of a man already caught. But there was something about the way it was written, precise, composed, final. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. I handed the envelope to Marta the next morning. She slipped on gloves before touching it, her eyes narrowing. "Did you see who left it?" It was on my doorstep. Again, no fingerprints, no cameras caught anything. Marta swore under her breath. "I'll contact the legal team and the authorities again. But Kala, this is stalking, escalation." "I know," I said. She looked up. "You don't seem surprised." "Because I'm not." I was beyond surprise. What Lewis had done before, I had thought was the worst of it. Discrediting me, trying to ruin my career, gaslighting my own voice. But this was psychological warfare. And I was determined not to blink. The following week, I moved into a temporary flat arranged by the publisher, one with full security monitoring and a private entrance. They insisted on it. The press was still buzzing from the scandal, and readers were flocking to asterisk the author who never vanished, like it was gospel. That kind of attention, I learned, was both a shield and a target. I tried to throw myself into the next book. I told myself I could channel the fear into something creative. I sat at the keyboard for hours. But the blinking cursor mocked me. I couldn't write. Not yet. Not when I kept checking the windows every 10 minutes. Not when every creak in the hallway made my pulse spike. So instead, I researched. I combed through Louis Branson's history, not just the public record, articles, publishing credits, his editorial tenure. I looked deeper, into the shadows. I found posts on obscure literary forums, users complaining about mysteriously altered drafts, ghost-written ideas, careers derailed by someone behind the curtain. Different usernames. But the style was the same, words weaponized, trust dismantled, all trails went cold after 2020. Until I found one thread. Posted under the username *Adastra wrote, a handle that had surfaced a few times. There was a comment dated 3 months before Lewis reappeared in my life. It said, "Greater than, they say, the ink is permanent. But the real power is in the editor's hand. What if the author isn't the hero in the story? What if the editor's pen never runs dry?" A chill crawled down my spine. I traced the IP address, what I could of it. It was cloaked through a library in Newcastle. I drove there the next day. The Newcastle Central Library was enormous, echoing with the click of footsteps on tile. I spoke with the branch's IT director, pretending I was researching for a podcast. She was helpful, told me there were public-use terminals, some with limited logs. She agreed to let me look at the dates I requested. There it was, on terminal number 14, 3 months prior. A login, an upload, an email sent through a proxy account. The email was addressed to a publisher, not mine. Subject, The Real Kala Merrick Story. I clicked the attachment link. It was encrypted. Locked with a passphrase. I recognized the document title, though, Vanishing Point _Finalf 7. I didn't recognize the content. Whoever Lewis had become, he wasn't just trying to ruin me anymore. He was rewriting Strime, drafting some alternate timeline, a literary deepfake. I printed the access record, photocopied everything. I'd had enough of being on the defensive. I called Marta. I need to hold a reading event. Now? You're barely sleeping. Exactly, I said. If he wants to erase me, the best response is to show the world I'm still writing. Still. Nipsta. Mein friend me. We announced the event within 24 hours. Tickets sold out in 4. It was held in Edinburgh, in a converted cathedral, beneath stained glass windows and high stone arches. I stood at the pulpit, spotlight warm on my face. Hundreds of readers sat in pews below, programs clutched in their hands. My breath shook as I began to read, not from fear, from defiance. The piece I read was new, unpublished, raw. It was a personal essay titled *Ghosts Don't Get Author Bios. I read for 20 minutes. And when I finished, the applause thundered so loud it shook the rafters. I stepped down from the platform. Marta met me at the bottom. Her phone was vibrating in her hand. "It's the police," she whispered. "They found something." We slipped into the green room. Marta put the call on speaker. "We tracked the sender of the most recent envelope," the officer said. "We found camera footage, grainy, but we enhanced it. It wasn't Lewis." My heart skipped. "Then who?" "A woman, late 40s, red scarf. She mailed it from London. We've ID'd her. Name's Isla Branson." My blood ran cold. "Lewis's sister." "Does she have a record?" Marta asked. "Nothing criminal, but she's known in publishing circles, ghostwrites under aliases, ties to independent imprints that have vanished mysteriously over the years." The officer paused. "We believe she may have helped forge that manuscript." I swallowed hard. It wasn't just Lewis. This was a network. We dug deeper. Marta's team pulled every known connection Isla had. Publishing houses, print shops, editors, agents. Patterns emerged. Contracts dissolved with no paper trail. Authors who vanished after one book. Manuscripts lost in system errors. It was systemic. We contacted 3 authors who'd been affected. At first, they were reluctant. But when I shared my story, they opened up. One woman, Charlotte Banks, said her second novel was edited into oblivion. Another man, Theo Dunn, said his memoir was rewritten and published under a different name entirely. He never saw a penny. They'd all signed NDAs. All had worked, briefly, with Isla Branson's hidden hand. "She promised me anonymity," Charlotte whispered, then took everything. I knew what we had to do. We formed a coalition. 5 authors, 1 lawyer, a digital forensics expert, and Marta. We called ourselves The Vanished. And we planned a literary reckoning. IDLUX. We launched a podcast, 1 episode per author, titled Hai Lai Ju, The Rewrite. The stories were heartbreaking, raw. But the audience grew. Each week, we trended. Readers were horrified. Publishers listened. And then, one morning, while prepping for my own episode, I received a direct message. From an anonymous account. It read, "We see you. We remember what you erased." Attached was a video. I hit play. It was surveillance footage from the Newcastle Library. I watched myself walk toward terminal number 14. Behind me, barely visible, a woman in a red scarf followed. She looked at the camera and smiled. The image froze, her eyes boring into the lens, her mouth curved into a smile that chilled my bones. It wasn't just the fact that Isla Branson had followed me. It was the knowing in her expression. As if she'd been watching me longer than I realized. As if she wasn't just observing, she was orchestrating. I replayed the clip over and over, searching for something, anything, that might give me a location, a sign, a slip in posture. But she was careful, deliberate. She'd done this before. Marta watched beside me, silent, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "She's not hiding anymore," she finally said. "She wants me to know she's watching, I murmured. It's psychological warfare. It's obsession. She's not just targeting me. I reached for my notes, flipping through case after case in the vanished archive. She's trying to erase anyone who threatens the system she built with Lewis. They've been ghostwriting entire careers, sabotaging those who won't play along. Marta nodded. And using your rise as a warning to others. You broke the mold. You succeeded, Jerxel without them. That makes you dangerous. I leaned back, heart pounding. Then let's be dangerous. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. We expanded The Vanished. What started as a small coalition became a movement. Writers, editors, interns, even former PR assistants came forward. Names were dropped. Trails uncovered. We mapped out Isla's influence across 3 continents and 2 decades. What we found was staggering. Times at least 14 ghost-written titles published under fake identities. Asterisk 9 authors who had been coerced into silence. Asterisk 3 suicides linked to career sabotage traced back to anonymous contracts with Branson Holdings, an entity tied to an offshore publishing firm. Still, Isla and Lewis evaded public exposure. They had lawyers. Shields, they moved like shadows. But Marta had an idea. We need a literary mirror, she said one night, hunched over her kitchen table, pages spread out like crime scene evidence. Something that reflects their entire operation, but fictionalized, layered. A novel? I asked. She nodded. Not just any novel, a metafictional memoir, your story, with theirs beneath it. We outlined it in 12 hours. I would write a story about a writer who's hunted by ghost editors, manipulated by a secret literary syndicate. A story that mirrors my own, but skewed, disguised just enough to slide past legal firewalls. We titled it Ink and Ashes. It was my most ambitious project yet. And the most dangerous. The writing consumed me. I went dark on social media. Interviews were postponed. I canceled an upcoming festival tour. I needed silence, space, solitude. I wrote for 14 hours a day. Marta became my only contact. She edited pages overnight. Sent notes at 3 a.m. I lived in that manuscript, breathed it. My protagonist, Ada Lorne, became my mirror. Fierce, haunted, brilliant. She uncovered a cabal of editors called The Quill. Their mission? Rewrite the world by rewriting the storytellers. I poured everything into her. My fear. My fury. My defiance. By chapter 30, I wasn't sure where she ended, and I began. And that's when the break-in happened. It was a Tuesday. Rain drummed against the windows like impatient fingers. I stepped out of my writing fog to grab tea and stretch. The back window was ajar. I never left it open. I froze. The apartment was silent. I grabbed my phone, called Marta, whispered, "I think someone's here." She told me to stay on the line. Police were on the way. I crept toward the study. My laptop was gone. So was the printed manuscript. I sank to my knees. They'd taken Sate, Ink and Ashes. The police combed the flat. No prints. No cameras caught the entry. It was surgical, professional. But I had backups. Encrypted, hidden in cloud servers under pseudonyms. What mattered was the message, "We can get to you." I refused to run. Instead, I doubled down. We finished the novel, released it under a surprise drop. No pre-orders, no IRCs, one link, one day, one voice. Times Ink and Ashes went viral overnight. Critics called it a fever dream exposé and the boldest work of fictional truth in a generation. Readers dissected the metaphors. And writers whispered about the real meaning behind The Quill. It hit #1 in less than a week. And then someone leaked an early draft, annotated with real names in the margins. My lawyer called me, panicked. "Did you release this version?" "No," I said. Someone else had. And the annotations? They matched names in our private research files. Isla, Lewis, half a dozen others. The leak wasn't sabotage. It was an inside confession. A defector. An anonymous tipster contacted Marta. She arranged a meeting in Berlin, neutral ground. I flew there under a pseudonym. The woman who showed up was young, late 20s, pale, nervous. She said her name was Lydia. She'd worked under Isla for 4 years as a junior editor. She runs it like a cult, Lydia whispered, fingers shaking around her coffee cup. You're groomed, told you're saving authors from themselves, that you're protecting the craft. Why come forward now? I asked. She looked at me, eyes wide, haunted. Because you fought back. Because your book told the truth. Because I helped rewrite my own sister's memoir and she never recovered. Tears streaked her cheeks. I have everything. Emails, contracts, audio recordings. She handed me a flash drive. Take them down. We went public. Marta coordinated with investigative journalists. The Guardian ran a 6-page exposé, The Ghost Syndicate. Lawsuits were filed. Authors sued for rights. Several publishing imprints were shuttered. Isla disappeared. Lewis was found in Prague under a false name, arrested, extradited. And me? I finally exhaled. But the victory was quiet. It wasn't headlines or champagne, it was writing again without fear. It was sleeping through the night. It was readers telling me they felt seen. I started a foundation for silenced writers. Lydia became the director. And Hyman's Trice DT IT Ink and Ashes won the Booker. I didn't walk the red carpet. I walked into a school library and read to a group of girls in uniform skirts and big dreams. Because that's where it started for me. Not in awards, but in a library, with a story that whispered, "You belong here too." The applause still echoed in my ears days after the Foundation's launch. We named it First Pages, a home for writers whose voices had been stolen, silenced, or rewritten against their will. It offered grants, legal assistance, mental health resources. Lydia insisted we keep the focus on accessibility, especially for women, queer writers, and people of color, the ones most targeted by syndicates like Isla's. But even as the world celebrated, I kept waiting for the next shadow to fall. Success had taught me that silence wasn't always safety. Sometimes it meant someone was drawing back the bowstring again. That bowstring snapped on a Thursday. I was in Paris for a guest lecture at La Sorbonne, an intimate roundtable about authorship, identity, and reclamation. They'd flown me out quietly, no publicity, no press. I arrived the night before, stayed in a discreet hotel Marta's assistant had vetted personally. Yet, even with all the precautions, the unease clawed at my ribs like it knew something I didn't. The envelope waited in my room when I returned from rehearsal. White, sealed in black wax, my name, Kala Merrick, written in blocky, deliberate ink. Inside was a single page, typed. Greater than, you're still writing the wrong ending. I turned it over. A line of coordinates was printed on the back. I Googled them. An old chateau, 30 kilometers outside of Paris, abandoned since 1998. Formerly the summer estate of a wealthy printing family. My stomach dropped. Not because of what it said, but because I recognized the location. It was where the manuscript for Asterix, The Garden Wounds, a 1996 novel that vanished before print despite a 7-figure advance, was last seen. The author, Elaine Chris, disappeared months after her tour began. No trace of her ever found. The case became an urban legend in literary circles. Everyone said she'd walked away from fame. Others whispered darker theories. I always believed she'd been silenced. And now, someone wanted me to follow her footsteps. I didn't tell Marta right away, not because I didn't trust her, but because I knew she'd forbid me from going. Instead, I called someone else. Harlan Black, investigative journalist, former war correspondent, one of the few people I trusted with a secret like this. He arrived in Paris 6 hours later. "You're not going alone," he said without waiting for me to finish the story. We rented a car at sunrise. The road curled like a serpent through the fog. Trees pressed in on either side, skeletal and reaching. The chateau emerged through the haze like something conjured, not built. Stone archways, broken shutters, ivy strangling the roof. We parked. Waited. Nothing. No sound. No footsteps. No other cars. Harlan reached into his coat, pulled out a small camera and a voice recorder. "You sure you want to do this?" I nodded. We stepped through the wrought iron gate. The interior was dust and echoes, furniture covered in white sheets, walls streaked with mold, but the library, the heart of the estate, was pristine. Not just clean, preserved. Dozens of manuscripts lined the shelves, leather-bound, tagged by name. I ran my fingers over the spines. Elaine Christ. Theo Dunn. Charlotte Banks. And me. Callum Merrick. Times Ink and Ashes, Ghost Draft Number 2. Harlan took photos, careful not to disturb anything. "What is this place?" I whispered. "A vault," he said, "a graveyard of stories." In the center of the room, a single desk, one chair, and a tape recorder. We pressed play. A woman's voice crackled through. "Elaine Christ. If someone finds this, I hope they understand I didn't run. I resisted. I wrote the book they feared. They couldn't erase it, so they erased Teinch me, asterisk." My hands clenched. She continued. "There is a name, a person pulling every string, not Isla, not Lewis, someone older, quiet, the real architect. They call them the final editor." Harlan and I exchanged a glance. We stayed in that library for 4 more hours, cataloging everything. Then we drove straight to the embassy. Interpol took it from there. That night, I broke down in my hotel. Not from fear, from grief. For Elaine. For everyone who never got their ending. The final editor. The whispers grew louder. A retired publisher from the early 90s. A name struck from every board, every credit. But their influence lingered, through proxies like Isla, Lewis, the Syndicate. Their real name remained a mystery. Until 2 months later. I was in Oxford, speaking to a panel of new MFA graduates. A woman in the back row raised her hand, short white hair, thick glasses. She asked, "Do you believe stories can be too dangerous to print?" The room went still. I answered carefully, "I believe truth is worth the risk." She nodded, smiled, walked out before the talk ended. Afterwards, I found a note folded on the podium. Greater than, "You're ready to meet me now." A phone number. No name. I called it from a burner phone. A man answered. American accent, calm. "Hello, Kala. I've been waiting." The man's voice was soft, almost grandfatherly. It wrapped around the words like parchment. Fragile but deliberate. I didn't recognize it. And yet, it felt familiar, like a book you'd read long ago and forgotten, only to stumble upon it years later, with all the emotions still buried in the spine. "I thought you'd call sooner," he said. "I don't even know who you are." "But I know you. I've known you since your first sentence." A chill skated across the back of my neck. "Are you the final editor?" A chuckle. Such a dramatic title. But yes, I am the one you've been writing toward all along. "Why me?" "You're not special, Kala. You're just the one who didn't flinch." Static hummed between us. Then he said, "You're ready now. You've written your resistance. Come see how the rest of it ends." He gave an address in Zurich, told me to come alone, then hung up. I stared at the burner phone, heart thrumming. I wasn't sure if I was terrified. Or ready. Marta flipped. "Zurich? Alone? Absolutely not. We've come this far." "Exactly. You don't need to walk into the lion's den to prove you're not afraid of teeth." I need to understand who's been doing this. I need to see the machine. "You already dismantled the machine." "No," I whispered. "I dismantled the gears. I need to find the person who forged the blueprints." We fought for hours. In the end, she agreed, reluctantly. I would go, but not unprotected. Zurich in late spring was disarmingly beautiful. Lake Zurich shimmered like a mirror for the sky. The air was crisp, clean, quiet. It didn't feel like the setting for a literary conspiracy's epicenter, and maybe that was the point. The address led to a manor tucked into the hills, High stone walls. No gatekeeper. The door opened before I knocked. A woman led me in, late 60s, silent. She wore gloves. We walked through a corridor lined with shelves. Not books, manuscripts, thousands of them. Some had names I recognized, ones that had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Others bore no author at all, only initials, years, or titles crossed out in black ink. We entered a library, not unlike the chateaus, but cleaner, curated. He sat by the window. An old man. Wire-rimmed glasses. A cane resting against his knee. He looked like a retired professor, the kind who would edit your thesis with red pencil but offer you a biscuit after. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, Calla." I sat. "Tea?" he asked. "No." He smiled. "Good. You're not here for pleasantries." "What are you?" "An editor, nothing more." "You're the one who orchestrated it all. The Ghost Syndicate, the erasures, the sabotage, the reprogramming of author identities." "Big words." "Accurate ones." He leaned forward. "Let me ask you something. How many authors have you helped rise, Calla, personally, beyond yourself?" I blinked. "What does that have to do with—" "Everything." He tapped the cane against the floor. "You see it as sabotage, but what I built, what Wib built, was a firewall against mediocrity, against stories that wasted the reader's time. You destroyed people. I curated literature. You stole lives." He tilted his head. "Did you read Gold Coast Letters?" "What?" "The novel that vanished in 2003, Elaine Christ's magnum opus." I stiffened. "It's locked away in the chateau." "Because it was too dangerous. Not because it was bad." I leaned forward. "You feared her voice." He smiled. "Yes, and fear is a kind of respect." "You killed her." "No, she killed herself. I merely gave her a choice." I stood. He didn't stop me. "You're going to prison," I said. "I already live in a prison, one of my own making. You'll be exposed." "Maybe," he looked out the window, "but another will take my place. That's the truth you won't print." "I already did." "Then write it better." I turned to leave. "Calla," he said as I reached the door. I looked back. "You were my greatest mistake." "Thank you." And then I walked out. Interpol raided the estate within the week. He was gone. The library had been emptied. All we found was a single note. Greater than every reader is an editor, and every editor, a god. It became the headline across Europe. Strikes the next 6 months were quiet. We won more lawsuits. First Pages expanded globally. The defector testimonies were adapted into a docuseries. But I didn't speak publicly. I wrote. My 6th novel, The Sentence, was about a woman who survives the rewriting of her identity and pens the version of her life no one else could touch. It wasn't revenge. It was resurrection. And when it hit the shelves, I didn't flinch. Because this time, no one tried to change the ending. I was living in Lisbon when the first review for The Sentence dropped. It was from the Times Literary Review, the same outlet that once called me a forgettable voice with no compass. But this time it read, "Greater than Merrick has not only found her compass, she's redrawn the map." I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I craved their approval. I was long past needing validation from the same people who once ghosted my submissions, but because I'd done it without compromise, without editors who sliced characters for profit or publishers who asked me to add romance for marketability. This book was mine, all mine, and the world finally saw it. Lisbon had become my sanctuary. Its pastel hills, narrow cobbled streets, and morning light that kissed the Tejo River, with the reverence of a lifelong reader opening a fresh book. I rented a sunlit apartment above a bookstore, run by an elderly couple, who only ever addressed each other as Señor and Señora. It was the kind of place that reminded me why I started writing in the first place. But the silence didn't last long. An anonymous message landed in my inbox at 2:14 a.m. Greater than the sentence was beautiful, but you missed someone. No signature, no metadata trail. Just a link. A private archive of manuscripts, none of them published. All of them attributed to ghostwriters I recognized from the First Pages investigations. But one folder stood out. Titled simply, Lost Authors. I clicked it, and there she was. Elaine Christ. A novel I'd never heard of. Times the 27th draft. Complete. Dated 2 months before her disappearance. Not the book they buried. A new one. I printed all 412 pages and stayed up until dawn reading. It was heartbreaking, brilliant, terrifying. A metafictional journey through the mind of a woman who knows she is being rewritten and fights to leave behind a version of herself that no editor can erase. Sound familiar? I cried when I finished. Not pretty, cinematic tears. I wept. Alone, in the kitchen, my tea long gone cold. Because Elaine hadn't vanished. She'd resisted. And her story had survived. I brought the manuscript to Lydia first. We sat at the office above First Pages London hub, sunlight striping the desk. She ran her hands over the pages like they were a body to be mourned. "This isn't just a manuscript," she said. "It's testimony. It's an indictment. We have to publish it." Lydia nodded, but with her name. "Of course. And with your introduction, it should come from you." I hesitated. "Are you sure?" "She wrote it so that someone like you would find it." We spent 6 months working through permissions, literary estate lawyers, and what remained of Elaine Christ's surviving family. Her niece, a quiet literature teacher from Bristol, gave her blessing. "Elaine was always the rebel," she said over tea. "She wrote truth like it owed her something." So we did it. The launch was international. The 27th draft was released under Elaine's name, unedited, unabridged. My introduction was simple. Greater than, this book is not just a novel. It's the resurrection of a voice that would not stay silent. It is a reminder that no matter how many pages are torn, the story still burns beneath the ash. The reaction stunned us. Critics called it the posthumous debut of the decade. Readers posted tributes across the world. Her photo, once relegated to small black and white print clippings, appeared on billboards in Berlin, Paris, Seoul. Elaine Christ finally took her place in the canon. And with her, every writer who had been buried by someone else's edit. The awards came. I barely attended them. My focus shifted. I started curating anthologies. Collections of rescued voices, abandoned manuscripts, hidden truths. I partnered with universities to digitize censored texts. We uncovered lost poetry by a queer Irish monk from the 11th century, a thriller manuscript smuggled out of Soviet Ukraine, a memoir written by a woman who escaped a 1950s asylum by writing her way free. Each one became a book. Each one became a liberation. But I hadn't written in over a year. Not for me. And I felt it. The ache. The hunger. The silence inside my bones. So I left Lisbon, took a train through Europe, ended up in a small alpine village on the border of Austria. No tourists, no Wi-Fi, just mountains, pinewood, and snow that melted like ink in sunlight. I rented a cottage, bought a new notebook, and wrote. For 30 days, one sentence at a time. I wrote about grief and grace and the way the world tries to redact both. I wrote about editors who become executioners and writers who rise from the graves they were never meant to enter. I wrote about girls who never learned to shout, but found the strength to whisper their way into history. When I finished, I called Marta. "I think it's my last novel." She was quiet. "Kala," she said, "you've said that before. This time, I mean it. What's it called?" "Asterisk, the original voice." "Asterisk." She exhaled. "Let's make it heard." The world didn't end when I finished the original voice. That surprised me. I'd half expected thunder, or maybe silence, something definitive. But instead, life continued. I woke up the next day to snow melting from the eaves, to the scent of pine and ash from my cottage fireplace. I brewed tea, reread the final pages, and closed the notebook gently. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't matter, but because it did. Because this book, above all others, had finally released me. From the need to prove. From the need to fight. From the shadows of voices that once tried to drown mine. When Marta read it, she didn't send a reply for 6 hours. I knew why. I sat in my little kitchen, fire flickering, watching the phone like it might whisper something before it rang. When it finally did, I didn't say hello. I just waited. Marta's voice broke. "It's the most important thing you've ever written." I closed my eyes. The launch wasn't like the others. We didn't announce it months ahead. No marketing blitz, no teaser campaigns, no pre-press interviews. I asked for a whisper, not a roar. Just one email. A midnight drop. Title, the final word. Message. Greater than to everyone who's ever been told their story didn't matter. Greater than this one's for you. The manuscript went live on First Page's open access imprint. Free for download, pay what you wish for physical copies. Within 3 days, it had over 2 million downloads. Readers wrote in languages I didn't speak. Translators offered their time for free. Bookstores cleared entire walls for handwritten reviews. It wasn't just a novel, it became a movement. #Original Voice trended worldwide. Teachers assigned it in classrooms. Survivors wrote essays. And still, I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't care, but because I had finally said everything I needed to. Then came the letters. Thousands of them. Actual letters. Not emails, not DMs. Handwritten, folded, posted from corners of the world I'd only ever dreamed of. I read every single one. A 12-year-old in Istanbul wrote, "Your book made me think maybe I'm not broken." A 91-year-old woman in Newfoundland wrote, "I never published a word, but now I write every morning." A man in Namibia wrote, "They burned my father's poems. I copied the ashes. Now they're alive again." I didn't cry when the book launched, but I cried then. Because that's what stories do. They become vessels. They sail farther than we ever could. A year passed. I stayed in Austria longer than planned, walked the hills, wrote short pieces, essays, meditations, fragments. I mentored a local girl named Ava, 16, sharp-tongued and brilliant. She reminded me of myself at that age, only braver. She asked once, "How do you know when a story is finished?" I said, "When it doesn't scream anymore, when it breathes." She nodded like she understood. She probably did. But then something strange happened. A courier arrived, no return address. Inside the box, one item. A worn leather journal. Blank. Except for the first page. Greater than Calamaric. Greater than, we're not finished yet. Greater than, a reader. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but something about the pressure of the strokes, bold, impatient, felt familiar. I thumbed through the pages, all empty, clean, waiting. And just like that, the quiet turned. Not into fear, but curiosity. What if the story wasn't over? What if the voice didn't want to stop? I called Marta. She laughed when she heard. I knew retirement wouldn't stick. "I'm not writing a novel," I said. She snorted. "Of course not. You're writing the beginning of whatever comes next." "I don't know what it is yet." "You never did, that's why it worked." 6 months later, I stood in the foyer of the British Library. Behind me, the main atrium buzzed with quiet reverence. In front of me, a glass case. Inside, Elaine Christ's original draft. Beside it, a first edition of *, the original voice. And next to that, a display placard that read, "Greater than this exhibit honors stories nearly lost, and the women who refuse to let them vanish." I didn't speak. I didn't take a photo. I just stood there, hands tucked into my coat sleeves, watching strangers read. One woman in her 40s mouthed a line from Elaine's manuscript. A boy in a school uniform whispered a quote from Santa Mine. A man pressed his palm gently to the glass, like he was saying thank you. They didn't know me, but they knew the words, and that was enough. The journal stayed with me. I kept it on the nightstand, not to fill it, but to remember that no matter what came next, no matter who tried to edit, cut, erase, the voice survived, because it was mine. Spring came to the Austrian mountains as softly as a secret, first in the form of melting icicles that wept off pine branches, then in the hesitant green threads curling out of the thawed earth. Ava and I took to walking the ridgeline most mornings, her always with a notebook under her arm, me with a thermos of tea and a kind of quiet I had never known before. She no longer asked why I didn't write anymore, because she'd figured it out. I wasn't done writing. I'd just stopped trying to write for anyone but myself. Back in London, First Pages was now 4 stories tall and had a board of directors from 5 continents. Lydia was handling international grants. Marta was consulting with public education systems to get marginalized authors into curricula. And the docuseries adaptation of Asterisk, Ink and Ashes had just won a BAFTA. They begged me to attend the awards. I didn't. Instead, I mailed a note. Greater Than stories do not need their authors to be seen, only to be heard. And then I hiked through a forest with Ava and read aloud to the trees. But the peace couldn't last forever. One afternoon in June, a letter arrived, hand-delivered, wrapped in wax paper, no sender. I opened it by the fire. Inside, a photograph, black and white, grainy, a room filled with shelves, and in the center, a podium. On the podium, an open manuscript. I knew that podium. It was from the Zurich estate. The final editor's vault. But we'd raided it. We'd seen it cleared out. The photo had been taken after search the raid. The note underneath was typed. Greater than they moved the archive. Greater than some stories don't burn. I took the letter to Marta. She called in Harlan. We retraced our steps. Interpol verified the photo's metadata. It was captured 3 weeks ago. In a new location. Geneva. What we discovered was not a home. It was a bunker. Built beneath a villa on the outskirts of the city. Completely off-grid. Reinforced concrete. Private security disguised as domestic staff. The final editor's true vault. Inside were thousands of stories. Not just unpublished manuscripts. Entire careers. Written, edited, suppressed. Many had never even been submitted. Drafts stolen from workshop forums. Student portfolios. Abandoned hard drives. They'd been watching for decades. And curating. I found an early short story I'd written at university. One I never finished, one I never submitted. And it had marginalia. Red notes, edits. Lines crossed out by a ghost who thought they knew me better than I did. I felt sick. They hadn't just stolen voices. They'd been collecting them, preserving them like butterflies, pinning them to paper, naming them, owning them. We filed a global injunction. Released a press statement. This time, there was no escape. The final editor, real name Maxwell Horn, was named. Interpol froze the estate. Victims began coming forward by the hundreds. The scandal eclipsed even the Branson revelations. Publishers reeled. Laws were drafted. A multi-country investigation began. And amid it all, a single question echoed. Greater than how many stories have we lost? I returned to Austria. Brought Ava with me. We sat on the porch with 2 laptops and built a database. We called it the Story Garden. It was a digital sanctuary, A place to upload abandoned work, unfinished drafts, silenced pages, AI, indexing and tagging, Creative Commons licensing, community-powered feedback. Within 2 months, it held over 40,000 entries. Teachers used it for classwork. Readers discovered emerging voices. And Ava? She published her first short story. Under her real name, no edits. Just her. I didn't think I would write again. But then I found something. In the Geneva Vault. A manuscript. It was labeled, Greater Than Tomoropaka Rewritten Life. Author, unknown. I opened it. The voice was unmistakable. It was mine. But wrong. It was my version of me who had given up after the 43rd rejection, who had taken a marketing job in Leeds, who never finished the first book, who never met Marta, who never fought back. Someone had written an entire alternate life, down to fictional journal entries, fake emails, even invented interviews. I closed it and backed away. Because it meant they hadn't just rewritten authors, they had rewritten outcomes. To prove a point. To break us. I burned it that night. And then I wrote a new piece. Just a page. One character. Her name, Remain. And she was the last survivor of a library that had tried to replace every book with a whisper. I don't know what it will become. But for the first time in years, I'm writing not to resist, but to rebuild. And when I look out at the mountains now, I see not just a horizon, but a bookshelf. Unwritten. Waiting. It was Ava who named the movement. One evening, as the sun spilled like wine down the slopes, she said, "You weren't just trying to stop them from erasing authors. You were unghosting us." That word unghosting slid into my chest like a matchstick. It wasn't just what we were doing. It was what had always been done to us. #unghosted went viral. First on writer forums, then on Reddit, then across major literary networks. But it wasn't a meme or a marketing ploy, it was a declaration. I unghosted my first story today. Reclaiming my manuscript from 2008, unghosted. Just published my dad's journal from 1972, unghosted. People started posting scanned pages, drafts, doodles, forgotten characters, pieces of their writing they'd been told were too much, too strange, too slow, too painful. We saw submissions from refugee camps, from rural schools, from prison libraries, from people who thought no one would ever want to read their words. They were wrong. And the world started listening. With Ava's help, we expanded the Story Garden into 7 languages, then 10. We added audio upload options for storytellers who couldn't write. We built a print-on-demand system with revenue sharing that paid writers directly. We partnered with libraries. And then, something unexpected. A school in Vancouver emailed us. Their students had used the database to produce a play. It was built from 5 different abandoned short stories, woven into one narrative. They called it The Echo Doesn't End. Ava and I flew out to see it. We sat in the front row, hands clasped, surrounded by the hum of something ancient and sacred, young voices speaking lost words back into the world. When the play ended, there was a standing ovation. And I knew this was bigger than anything I'd ever published. Because I hadn't authored it. I'd simply cleared the space where it could be born. I returned to Austria with my laptop open and my mind on fire. I started writing essays, manifestos, field guides for the silenced. Not because I wanted attention, but because something was shifting. And the literary world needed to shift with it. I called Marta. "We need a press," I said. "Not a publisher, a press, cooperative, author-run. Curated by survivors." "You're thinking global?" "I'm thinking inevitable." We launched Ashlight Press in under 6 months. Our first release was a trilingual collection of short works from women across the African diaspora. Our second was a graphic novel about an autistic boy navigating a post-apocalyptic library. Our third, a memoir compiled from 5 decades of secret letters. The press didn't aim for profit. It aimed for permanence. In the autumn of that year, I was invited to speak at the Frankfurt Book Fair. I declined. But I sent Ava. She stood on that stage, just 19, and told the world what we'd built. She said, "Greater Than Calla Merrick didn't just save stories. She taught us we could save our own." She said, "Greater Than, this isn't about who gets published, it's about who gets remembered." She said, "Greater Than, we were never voiceless, just unheard." The applause lasted 8 minutes. She came home with a contract offer from 3 houses. She turned them all down and published her first novella through Ashlight. It sold 100,000 copies in the first week. We weren't building a legacy. We were burning down the idea that we needed one to begin with. Because the truth is, stories don't have to last forever to matter. They just have to be told. That winter, I returned to the United Kingdom for the first time in 2 years. A library in Manchester had dedicated an entire wing to the vanished, complete with author portraits, original drafts, and audio installations. When I walked into the exhibit, a small girl pointed at my face. "Mom," she whispered, "that's the one who wrote the book with the girl who disappeared." Her mother corrected her. "No, love, she's the one who made her peer, asterisk." I wept. Right there, by the plaque. Because sometimes, the world gives you the ending you didn't know you needed. And it arrives in the voice of a child who thinks books are magic. Because they are. I kept the journal. The one that arrived blank. Page by page, it began to fill. Not with fiction. Not with memoir. But with letters. To the versions of me that had nearly stopped. To the girls who didn't know they were allowed to speak. To the authors whose books never made it to a shelf, but who wrote anyway. I called it Letters She'll Never Send. I printed 10 copies. I left them in libraries. No barcode. No catalog listing. Just a sticker inside that said, "Greater Than, take this if you need it. Greater Than, leave it when you're ready." They disappeared within days. Ava found one in Reykjavik. Someone else found one in a bookstore in Morocco. Another showed up in a cafe in Buenos Aires. And I realized, maybe the best stories are the ones we don't trace. Just trust. Let go. And believe that somewhere, someone needed to hear them more than we needed to be known for them. There is no final word. But maybe there is a final Timeless act. And mine was this. To write without asking permission. To speak like no one could cut the mic. To leave behind stories that refused to vanish. The year I turned 35, I disappeared for a while. Not in the way I had feared long ago. Not vanished by force, not erased by anyone's edit, but by choice. A quiet, deliberate fade. No announcement, no farewell post. Just a slow unspooling of presence until the world didn't expect me to show up anymore. I gave Ava the keys to the story garden. I told Marta I wouldn't be taking on any new editorial projects. I left Ashlight Press in the hands of a younger board. And then I left. Where did I go? Everywhere. And nowhere. I carried a backpack, 2 notebooks, 1 change of clothes, and the journal. No phone, no laptop, no return ticket, just me. In a coastal town in Portugal, I worked for room and board at a citrus farm. I learned the silence of lemons. I memorized the sky. In a fishing village in Iceland, I sat beside a woman who translated fairy tales into sign language. She said the hardest stories to translate were the ones people believed were meant to be read silently. She taught me how to tell a story with my hands. In rural Japan, I stayed with an elderly calligrapher who never published a single word. When I asked why, he smiled and dipped his brush into ink. "You mistake publication for permanence," he said. He handed me a scroll. It read, Greater than the fire remembers even the ashes. I stayed 3 weeks. Time became irrelevant. Days blurred, seasons changed. I woke with the sun. I wrote only when I wanted to. No structure, no pressure, just breath on the page. One night, in a train station outside Prague, I met a man who recognized me. He looked unsure, then said, "Didn't you used to be someone?" I smiled. "No," I said. "I scum someone. I just used to be louder." He didn't understand. But I did. After a year, I returned. Not to London. To a cottage on the edge of the Scottish Highlands. One window, one table, no electricity, just paper, wood, and wind. It felt like home. I lit a fire. Made tea. Opened the journal. The last entry I'd written was dated 15 months prior. It read, "Greater than maybe, the voice doesn't vanish. Greater than maybe, it just waits." I smiled. And then I turned to the next page. I wrote a letter to the girl I was at 17, the one who believed writing a book would save her. I told her she was right. But not in the way she thought. Books didn't save me. Tumsties did. And then I wrote another letter. To Elaine Christ. I told her I kept my promise. Her story lives. And because of her, so do thousands more. I left the letter by the river the next morning. The wind took it. When spring returned, Ava visited. She was older now, her hair longer, her voice steadier. She wore a silver ring on her right hand, engraved with a line from her first story. She brought news. First Pages had received a grant to expand into South America. Pice Ashlight's latest release, a debut poetry collection from a Syrian refugee, was being taught in universities. Times The Story Garden now housed over 200,000 entries. "And you," she asked over dinner, "what have you written?" I handed her a stack of letters. She opened the top one and read silently. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "Kala, this is a book." "No," I said, "it's not. It's what comes after one." We decided to print it. Just 500 copies. Hand-bound, no ISBN, no marketing, no names on the cover. We placed them in cities around the world. Inside the front page, "Greater than this is not a book. Greater than this is what survived." It became a legend. Readers called it Staiti, the Whispered Archive. Some thought it was a puzzle, others a manifesto. Some said it was magic. They were all right. And none of them were. Because the truth is, it wasn't about the words. It was about what the words left behind. One summer evening, I received a letter. No return address. Inside, "Greater than I found her. Greater than she's alive. Greater than. A reader." Attached was a photo. A woman. Gray hair. Lined face. Typing on a laptop beneath a jacaranda tree. Elaine Christ. Older. But unmistakably her. The photo had been taken in Bogota. I flew there the next day. When I found her, she was hosting a writing circle in a community garden. She turned as I approached, and said my name before I said hers. I couldn't speak. She opened her arms, and I fell into them. We sat for hours. She told me how she escaped, how she'd built a new life under a new name, how she'd seen Times the 27th draft published and thought it was a dream. "I wrote that for someone like you," she said. "And I found it," I whispered. We talked long after the sun set. Not as authors, not as victims, as women who had found each other. Across silence. Across time. Across every attempt to erase them. We returned to Austria together. She stayed in the cottage across the hill. Sometimes we wrote side by side. Sometimes we sat in silence. Sometimes silence. Nasser. Store was the story. Crushy Kamelins. Fine letter left in the journal. I haven't written it yet, but I know what it will say. Greater than if you're reading this, your voice is still here. Greater than use it. Elaine passed away the following spring. She was sitting by the lake, notebook open on her lap, pencil still tucked between her fingers. The last sentence she ever wrote. Greater than we were never lost. Just unread. The funeral was small, private, just as she'd wanted. A few friends from her Bogota circle flew in. Ava came. Lydia, too. Marta sent a bouquet of wildflowers and a note that simply said, "Thank you for the fire." I delivered the eulogy. Not from a pulpit, from a stone bench under the oak trees she loved. I told them Elaine wasn't just a survivor. She was a mapmaker. She didn't wait for the world to make room for her voice. She carved out space for the rest of us to follow. And we had. In the silence that followed, a girl from her writing circle read from the 27th draft. She choked up halfway through, and Ava reached out and held her hand. We didn't finish the reading. We didn't need to. Some endings are better unfinished. I took Elaine's final notebook back to the cottage. Every page was filled. Stories, letters, lists of names she'd remembered, authors she loved, quotes she copied from handwritten newsletters mailed to her in hiding. On the last page, greater than if you find this, write something. Greater than add your voice. Greater than then, pass it on. I did. And we did. That summer, the notebook traveled with Ava to Kenya, then to Malaysia, then to Brooklyn. Writers from everywhere added their lines. Poems, protests, dreams. The last I heard, it was in Oaxaca. Somewhere. Still writing itself. My own journal, the one that started with a threat and ended in hope, was nearly full. I reread every page. The fears. The battles. The stories that tried to silence me. The stories that saved me. And then I closed it. Wrapped it in cloth. And left it in the hollow of an ash tree near the riverbank, where writers often went to sit. I didn't label it. Didn't sign it. Just left one message inside the front cover. Greater than, if you found this, it's yours now. Greater than, tell us what came next. On the 10th anniversary of * Bricks and Daisies, I was asked to deliver a keynote in London. I declined, but I sent Ava. She brought with her 3 other young writers, each from a different continent, each with a manuscript that would have once been ignored. They spoke about fear, about survival, about reclaiming the pen. And when they finished, the audience stood. Not for applause, but for permission. To write. To resist. To remain. Years passed. I wrote when I wanted to, never again for fame, never again to prove anything. I published anonymously, pseudonyms, zines, pamphlets, poems carved into the bark of trail trees. Ava told me once, "They say your work is being studied in universities now." I smiled. "Which name did they use?" She laughed. "Who cares? They're still reading." Exactly. One autumn morning, I found a child waiting outside the cottage. A girl, 8, maybe 9, wind in her coat, dirt on her knees, holding a folded piece of paper. She didn't say anything, just handed it to me and ran. I unfolded it. 4 words, scrawled in crayon. Greater than I wrote a story. And beneath that, taped to the page, was a single daisy. I placed it in a jar by the window, watched the petals curl in the light, and realized this was the legacy. Not the books, not the awards, not the headlines, the stopperful termission, the ripple. The story someone else dares to write because they saw you survive writing yours. I'm older now, no longer the girl on the hardwood floor, no longer the woman clawing for shelf space. I am something else, quieter, stronger, free. And as I look around this little cottage, books stacked on the floor, letters tacked to the wall, the firelight curling around every story that ever made it, I know exactly how I want to end this. I want to end it with "Use shows a camera ZTs." Because if you've made it this far, it means you kept turning pages. It means you believed I'd make it, even when I didn't. So let me say this. You can write it. You can fight for it. You can unghost yourself. Because stories don't die. They just wait for someone brave enough to finish them. And if no one else will, let that someone be you. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.